Hi everyone, welcome to Cortoon. I hope you're all doing well. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about the amazing world of Gumball, but not in the way most people talk about it. Not about the comedy, not about the animation, not about the moments that made you laugh so hard you forgot it was technically a children's show. We're going to talk about the questions, the ones the show asked and never answered, the threads it left dangling, the mysteries it planted in your mind and then walked away from, quietly, without looking back. Because Gumball, across its 6 seasons and 240 episodes, accumulated an extraordinary number of unanswered questions. Some of them are small, silly even. The kind of thing you notice on a rewatch and think, that's weird, and then move on. But some of them are massive, existential, the kind of questions that burrow into your brain at 3 in the morning and refuse to leave. And the strangest part is that the show seemed to know exactly what it was doing. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't forgetful. It was deliberate. It left these doors open on purpose, and it never came back to close them. So tonight, settle in, get comfortable. We're going to start with the small, fun mysteries, the ones that make you smile, and then we're going to work our way down, deeper and deeper, through the character mysteries, and the world mysteries, and the ones that touch something genuinely philosophical. And by the end, I think you'll feel the weight of just how much this show left unresolved. How many questions are still floating out there in the space between what was shown and what was meant. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Let's start with the small stuff. The mysteries that aren't going to keep you up at night, but do make you tilt your head a little when you think about them. The kind of thing you notice on a 3rd or 4th rewatch, and then spend 20 minutes thinking about before deciding it probably doesn't matter, even though a small part of your brain suspects it does. And I should mention here, before we go any further, that Gumball ran for 6 seasons and 240 episodes between 2011 and 2019. That's a lot of content, a lot of characters, a lot of storylines started, and not all of them finished. Some of the mysteries I'm about to describe might be genuine oversights, production errors that crept in, because the show was being made at an extraordinary pace, with new episodes turning around in weeks rather than months. But some of them, I'm increasingly convinced, were deliberate. Planted by writers who knew exactly what they were doing, who understood that the unanswered question is sometimes more powerful than the answer, and who trusted their audience to appreciate the difference. Darwin's full name. In the episode called The Party, which aired in Season 1, Darwin introduces himself and rattles off what he claims is his complete legal name. Darwin Raglan Caspian, Ahab, Poseidon Nicodemus, Watterson, the Third. The Third, which implies there were 2 Darwins before him. 2 goldfish who came and went before this one stuck around. And for a while, that was a fun little detail. A throwaway joke about how goldfish don't live very long, and families tend to replace them without telling the kids. But then, the show made an episode called The Origins, a 2-parter in Season 3, that told the story of how Darwin came to be part of the Watterson family. And in that episode, we see that there weren't just 2 goldfish before Darwin. There were many, at least 6, possibly more, all of whom met various unfortunate ends before Darwin miraculously grew legs, developed the ability to breathe air, and became a sentient member of the household. So if Darwin is the 3rd, who were the other numbered ones? And what happened to goldfish 4, 5, 6, and beyond? The show never reconciles this. Darwin's full name says one thing, his origin story says another, and both are presented as canon, sitting side by side, contradicting each other without apology. It's a small thing, a continuity hiccup, but it's also a preview of something the show would do more and more as it went on, which is present contradictory information and let the audience sit with the discomfort of not knowing which version is true. And later, in a move that feels almost impossibly self-aware, the revival series explicitly has characters notice and discuss plot holes in their lives, as if the contradictions aren't errors at all, but symptoms of something deeper, cracks in a reality that was never as solid as it appeared. Here's another small one, the school mascot. In The Meddler, the mascot of Elmore Junior High appears to be a duck. In the fight, it's described as a minnow. In other episodes, it's referenced as a Mustang. 3 different mascots, 3 different episodes, and no acknowledgement that anything changed. It's the kind of thing that could be a genuine production error, the animators and writers not keeping track of background details across seasons. But with Gumball, you can never be entirely sure, because this is a show that eventually made its own inconsistencies part of the plot. Speaking of inconsistencies, let's talk about the Watterson family history, because there's a contradiction that's genuinely hard to explain away. In the end, which aired early in the series, Nicole mentions that Gumball's grandfather died at the age of 102, a specific number, an offhand piece of family history delivered casually and then forgotten. Except later in the series, we meet both of Gumball's grandfathers, Frankie Watterson, Richard's father, and Nicole's parents. They're all very much alive, and they're nowhere near 102. They appear to be roughly in their 60s, maybe 70s. Healthy, active, present. So who was the grandfather who died at 102? Was it a great-grandfather? Was it a throwaway joke from early in the series that the writers later contradicted without realizing? Or was it something the show did intentionally, adding a piece of family history that doesn't fit with anything that comes later? There's no answer. The show moved on and never looked back, leaving this small crack in the family's timeline that nobody ever bothered to repair. And then there's Carrie. Carrie Kruger, the emo ghost girl who becomes one of Darwin's closest relationships. In one episode, she says she was born a ghost. She's always been this way. But in another, The Ghost, she implies she used to have a physical body, that she lost it. That being a ghost is something that happened to her, not something she always was. These two statements can't both be true, at least not in any straightforward way. And the show never picks one. It lets them coexist, like two versions of the same person's history, neither confirmed, neither denied. Just floating there in the background, waiting for someone to notice. And then there are the characters who simply vanished. The ones who were there, episode after episode, and then weren't. The most notable case is Rachel Wilson, Tobias's older sister. She appeared in season 1, most prominently in The Party, where she threw a house party that became one of the series' most memorable early episodes. She was established as a real character, with relationships and a personality and a place in the social hierarchy of Elmore. And then season 2 began, and she was gone. Not dead, not moved away, just absent. As if the show had simply decided she didn't exist anymore. The behind-the-scenes explanation is practical. The production team apparently didn't feel the character was working, so they quietly dropped her. But within the show's fiction, nobody addresses her absence. Nobody asks where Tobias's sister went. Nobody mentions her name. She's just not there anymore, as thoroughly erased as anything the Void consumed. Years later, in a supplementary short from Darwin's yearbook, there's a brief mention that Rachel went to college. A retroactive patch on a wound that had been open for multiple seasons. And in the rewrite, a doll of her appears, a ghostly echo of a character the show discarded. But neither of these references constitutes a real explanation. They're afterthoughts. Band-aids applied to a gap that nobody bothered to stitch closed when it first appeared. And Rachel isn't the only one. Molly Collins, who becomes plot relevant when she's rescued from the Void, was herself a character who had disappeared without explanation before the show decided to make that disappearance part of the story. Sussy appeared and vanished at irregular intervals. Background characters shifted and changed without acknowledgement, as if Elmore's population was fluid, constantly being revised by some unseen editorial hand. This fluidity is itself a mystery, and one the show eventually addresses with characteristic brilliance. The Void, as a concept, exists in part as an in-universe explanation for the show's own production decisions. Characters disappear because they're sent to the Void. The Void exists because characters disappear. It's circular logic, a narrative Ouroboros, and it's one of the most elegant solutions any show has ever found for the problem of continuity in long-running animation. But even that solution raises questions it doesn't answer. If the void is the show's way of explaining its own inconsistencies, does that mean the inconsistencies are intentional? Are they all part of the narrative? Or are some of them genuine mistakes that the show later incorporated into its mythology? Where does the production error end and the storytelling begin? The line between accident and design in Gumball is impossibly blurry, and the show seems to like it that way. These are the small mysteries, the little cracks in the surface. They're fun to spot, satisfying to catalog, and ultimately harmless. They don't change how you feel about the show. They're more like inside jokes for attentive viewers, Easter eggs that reward close attention without demanding it. But now, let's go a little deeper. Because behind the small continuity errors and the background gags, there are genuine character mysteries that the show took the time to set up, explore to a point, and then leave hanging. Let's start with Penny Fitzgerald. Penny spent the first 2.5 seasons of Gumball trapped inside a shell, literally encased in an external covering that hid her true appearance from the world. She looked like a peanut with antlers, which in the context of Elmore was perfectly normal. Just another resident with an unusual body. Gumball had a crush on her from the very beginning of the series, and their relationship was one of the show's most consistent through lines. Then, in Season 3, Episode 20, an episode called The Shell, everything changed. During a school play, Gumball accidentally cracks Penny's shell, and what emerges is something nobody expected. Not a peanut, not an animal. A glowing, luminescent, fairy-like creature with antlers and wings. A shapeshifter whose form changes depending on her emotional state. When she's scared, she becomes a beast. When she's happy, she glows. She's beautiful and strange, and entirely unlike anything else in Elmore. It's one of the show's most memorable moments. Gumball sees her true form and tells her that her looks don't define who she is, but rather just how she feels. It's genuinely sweet, genuinely moving, and it's a satisfying emotional resolution to a story that had been building for 60-odd episodes. But here's the thing. The reveal answers the question of what Penny looks like, but it raises a much bigger question that the show never addresses. What is she? What species? What category of being? What kind of creature looks like a glowing fairy that can shapeshift based on emotion? The show doesn't tell us. Her family, the Fitzgeralds, all had shells too, but the show never explains why. It never tells us where the shells came from, why the Fitzgeralds wore them, what the history of their species is, or whether there are others like them in Elmore or beyond. After the shell breaks, Penny becomes a shapeshifter. Her emotions dictate her form. When she's frightened, she transforms into a creature that looks like something from a horror film, all teeth and shadow. When she's content, she glows softly, a warm and gentle light. When she's angry, she becomes something sharp and dangerous. Her body is a barometer of her inner state, visible to everyone around her, impossible to hide. There's something beautiful about this concept, and the show treats it with genuine tenderness. Penny's journey out of her shell is a metaphor for self-acceptance, for letting the world see who you really are, rather than hiding behind a protective exterior. And Gumball's response, his immediate and unconditional acceptance of her true form, is one of the most emotionally satisfying moments in the entire series. But the metaphor only goes so far. Because once you move past the emotional register and start asking practical questions, the answers aren't there. Penny's reveal is treated as an ending, as a resolution. But it's really a beginning. It opens a door to an entirely new set of questions about the nature of identity, species, and belonging in Elmore, and then it closes the door and walks away. Her family is part of the mystery, the Fitzgeralds. Mr. Fitzgerald is protective to the point of aggression, particularly toward Gumball, and he seems to have very strong feelings about Penny's shell and what it represents. The shell, in their family, isn't just a physical covering. It's a tradition, a way of life, a decision to hide your true nature from the world, whether out of modesty, fear, or something the show never quite names. When Penny breaks out of her shell, her father's reaction suggests that she's violated something more than a dress code. She's broken a covenant, rejected a fundamental aspect of what it means to be a Fitzgerald. But why? Why do the Fitzgeralds wear shells? What are they protecting? What are they protecting themselves from? Is the shell a response to some historical trauma, a cultural practice developed over generations to shield a vulnerable species from a dangerous world? Or is it something more personal, a family tradition that nobody questions anymore because it's been going on so long that the original reason has been forgotten? The show raises these questions through implication and then lets them dissolve into the background. Penny removes her shell, her father eventually comes to terms with it, and life goes on. But the deeper question, the question of what the Fitzgeralds are and why they evolved or developed the need for protective shells, is never addressed. It's one of those beautiful, frustrating Gumball mysteries that feels like it has an answer sitting just below the surface, visible but unreachable, like a coin at the bottom of a deep pool. Penny continues to appear throughout the series. She and Gumball maintain their relationship, but the deeper mysteries of what she is and where she comes from are never revisited. The surface question was answered. The deeper one was left untouched. Now let's talk about Nicole Watterson, because her backstory is one of the most emotionally rich and simultaneously incomplete elements of the entire series. And if you're the kind of person who watches animated shows and thinks you know all there is to know about the characters after a season or two, Nicole will teach you otherwise. Because the more you learn about her, the more you realize how much you don't know. Nicole is, by any measure, the most competent person in Elmore. She holds the family together. She works, she cleans, she fights, she solves problems. She has a martial arts ability that borders on supernatural, a temper that terrifies everyone who encounters it, and a deep well of suppressed emotion that occasionally erupts in ways that suggest she's carrying far more pain than she lets on. The show gives us pieces of her history. We learn she was born Nicole Senecourt, that she came from a wealthy family with impossibly high standards. Her father was volatile. Her mother was obsessed with perfection and appearance. They had expectations for Nicole that she could never meet, or perhaps could meet, but refused to, because meeting them would have meant becoming someone she didn't want to be. We learn that her parents never approved of Richard. They saw him as beneath her. They refused to attend her wedding. Nicole eventually stormed out of her family home after a fight and never looked back, choosing to build a life with Richard from nothing rather than continue living under her parents' suffocating expectations. And that's powerful. That's genuinely moving storytelling. The idea that Nicole's strength, her ferocity, her relentless competence, comes not from a place of confidence, but from a place of survival. She learned to be strong because she had to be, because nobody was going to be strong for her, because the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally loved her conditionally, and she chose to walk away from that love rather than keep trying to earn it. But the show only gives us the outline, the sketch. We get the broad strokes of Nicole's childhood, but we never get the details. We never learn exactly what happened between her and her parents. We never see the moment she decided to leave. We never understand the full depth of what that choice cost her, or whether there was ever a moment of reconciliation, or whether the door she closed behind her when she left her parents' house stayed closed forever. And there's the question of Nicole's rage. The show depicts Nicole as terrifyingly powerful when she's angry. She can fight with a skill and intensity that seems to transcend the normal rules of the show's physics. Cars crash around her. The ground shakes. Other characters cower in genuine fear. Where does this come from? Is it a literal supernatural ability? Something inherent to her species? Or her nature? Or is it something she developed? A survival mechanism forged in a childhood where she had to fight for every scrap of validation? The show treats Nicole's rage as both comedic and genuinely frightening, and it's the genuinely frightening part that raises the most questions. Because there are moments when Nicole's anger feels less like a character trait and more like a trauma response, less like a joke and more like a warning. Something happened to Nicole Cinnecourt before she became Nicole Watterson. Something that turned her into a person who smiles through everything, and then, when pushed past her breaking point, becomes something that everyone in Elmore, from her own children to literal monsters, is afraid of. What was that something? The show gives us pieces, but never the whole picture. It lets us see the cracks in Nicole's composure without ever fully explaining what made them. There's a version of Nicole's story that could fill an entire series on its own. The story of a girl who grew up in a house where love was conditional, who fell in love with the wrong person, according to everyone who was supposed to matter, who built a family on her own terms and defended it with a ferocity that scared even her. That story is in Gumball. You can see its shape, but it's never fully told. It's gestured at, hinted at, sketched in broad strokes, and then left for the audience to fill in. And there's a quieter question about Nicole that the show raises without ever fully acknowledging. Why did she choose Richard? On paper, it makes no sense. Nicole is the most capable person in Elmore. She's brilliant, fierce, tireless, terrifyingly competent. Richard is, by most measures, her opposite. He's kind, he's loving, he's warm, but he's also functionally incapable of running his own life. He can't hold a job. He can barely take care of the children without supervision. He's a grown man who still behaves like a child in most situations. So why him? The show gives us the romance without fully explaining its logic. We see that Nicole loves Richard, and we see that Richard loves Nicole, and we're meant to accept that as sufficient. And in one sense it is. Love doesn't follow logic. People fall in love with people who don't make sense on paper, and the mystery of that attraction is part of what makes relationships interesting. But in another sense, the choice reveals something about Nicole that the show never quite articulates. She chose someone who would never judge her, who would never hold her to impossible standards, who would love her unconditionally, without demanding perfection, without withholding affection until she earned it. She chose the opposite of her parents. And that choice, whether conscious or instinctive, tells you more about Nicole's childhood than any flashback ever could. She wasn't looking for an equal. She was looking for safety, for the certainty that the person she came home to would still be there, still loving her, still happy to see her, no matter how badly the day had gone. That reading isn't confirmed by the show. It's inference, interpretation, the kind of thing you piece together from scattered clues and quiet moments, and the spaces between what's said and what's shown. And the fact that the show leaves room for that interpretation, that it gives you enough to build the theory, but not enough to confirm it, is what makes Nicole one of the most fascinating characters in animation. Richard's backstory runs parallel to Nicole's in some ways, and it's equally incomplete in its own fashion. Richard Watterson is, on the surface, one of the simplest characters in the show. He's lazy. He's childlike. He's not particularly bright. He loves food. He loves his family. And he doesn't seem to carry the kind of emotional weight that Nicole does. He's comedy. He's lightness. He's the character you laugh at without thinking too hard about why he's the way he is. But the show does tell us why, at least partially. Richard's father is Frankie Watterson, and Frankie is a con man, a scammer, a man who abandoned his wife, Joanna, and his son to avoid arrest for selling fake moon property deeds to senior citizens. Richard was told his father was going out to buy milk. A classic, devastating lie. The kind of thing that sounds funny from the outside and feels like a wound that never heals from the inside. After Frankie left, Richard's mother, Granny Jojo, overcompensated. She smothered him, protected him from everything, never let him develop independence or critical thinking skills or the basic competencies that would have allowed him to function as an adult. She loved him so much and was so afraid of losing him the way she lost Frankie that she made him helpless. And that helplessness became his identity. The lovable, useless, childlike man who can't do anything for himself is, underneath the comedy, a product of abandonment and overprotection. A man shaped entirely by forces beyond his control. There's a particularly revealing episode called The Man in Season 3, which deals with Granny JoJo's love life, and by extension, Richard's relationship with the concept of fatherhood. When JoJo introduces a new boyfriend, Richard's reaction isn't rational adult discomfort. It's childlike panic. He behaves like a toddler whose mother is paying attention to someone else. He throws tantrums. He sabotages. He regresses to a version of himself that is essentially pre-verbal, pre-rational, pre-everything that an adult is supposed to be. And the show plays it for laughs, because that's what the show does. But underneath the laughs, there's a portrait of a man who was arrested in his development at a very early stage, whose emotional maturity stalled somewhere around age 5 and never progressed, who responds to threat and change with the tools of a child because those are the only tools he was ever given. The show presents this with remarkable economy. A few episodes, a few key scenes, and the picture is complete enough to be devastating. But it's not complete. Not really. Because the show never fully explores whether Richard could have been different. Whether there's a version of him that exists underneath the learned helplessness. A Richard who could have grown up competent and capable if his father hadn't left and his mother hadn't smothered. There are hints. Moments where Richard shows surprising depth or unexpected ability. But they're always played for comedy. And the underlying question, whether Richard is genuinely incapable or whether he's been programmed to believe he's incapable, is never definitively answered. And then there's the relationship between Richard and Frankie, which the show addresses most directly in The Father, Season 6, Episode 6. Frankie returns, and the episode deals with the complicated emotions of having a deadbeat father reappear after decades. But even here, the resolution is partial. We learn that Frankie feels genuine remorse, that he left because he believed he was unfit to be a parent, that his criminal tendencies would corrupt his son. But we never learn whether that belief was true or just a convenient excuse. We never learn whether Frankie and Richard reach any kind of lasting peace. The episode ends, and the wound stays open, partly healed, partly infected, never quite clean. Let's move to the character who might be the most fascinating mystery in the entire show. Rob. Because if Nicole's story is a mystery of depth, of how much lies beneath a familiar surface, Rob's story is a mystery of existence itself, of what it means to be, of what it costs to be noticed. Rob started as nothing, literally nothing. A background character so unremarkable that even the show itself forgot he existed. He was a student at Elmore Junior High, a minor figure in crowd shots, a body-filling space. Nobody knew his name. Nobody cared about his story. He existed in the show the way extras exist in movies, as furniture, as decoration, as proof that the world contains more people than just the protagonists. And then the show did something extraordinary with him. In Season 3, Episode 12, an episode called The Void, Gumball and Darwin discover that a classmate named Molly has disappeared. Not moved away, not transferred, disappeared, erased from reality, as if she never existed. They investigate and discover the Void, a mysterious dimension that functions as a dumping ground for things the world considers mistakes. Dated trends, forgotten ideas, discarded concepts, all of them floating in a liminal space of television static and broken physics. During their rescue of Molly, Rob is glimpsed in the Void. He calls out to them. He begs for help. And they don't hear him. They don't notice him. They rescue Molly and leave, and Rob is left behind, screaming into the static, as forgotten in the Void, as he was in the real world. But Rob escapes. In The Nobody, Season 3, Episode 36, he appears in the Watterson's house, disfigured and broken, a glitched-out remnant of the person he used to be. He's suffered amnesia. He doesn't know who he is or how he got there. And when Gumball and Darwin find him and try to figure out what he is, he has a moment of recognition. He remembers being in the void. He remembers calling for help. He remembers being ignored. And this is where the show does something that's genuinely remarkable for a children's cartoon. It pauses. It gives Rob a moment of real, unadorned despair. Not comedic despair. Not exaggerated, cartoon sadness. Real, quiet, painful acknowledgement that he doesn't matter. That he never mattered. That his entire existence was filler, padding, background noise in someone else's story. And he makes a choice. If the world won't give him a role, he'll take one. If he can't be a hero, if he can't be a friend, if he can't be anything the narrative values, then he'll be a villain. Because at least a villain matters. At least a villain gets noticed. At least a villain has a purpose, even if that purpose is destruction. There's a detail about Rob's physical appearance after escaping the void that deserves attention. He's broken, glitched. Parts of his body are missing or corrupted, as if the void damaged him on a fundamental level. He looks like a character from a video game where the texture files have been corrupted. Fragments of color where skin should be. Chunks of his outline missing. His eye misaligned, one side of his face higher than the other. He's a visual representation of what happens when a piece of data is improperly extracted from one system and forced into another. He doesn't fit anymore. He doesn't belong. And his body shows it. The show never explains whether Rob's damage is permanent or whether it could be healed. It never tells us what he looked like before the void. We don't know if he was a specific type of character, a specific species, a specific anything. He was nobody, and now he's a broken nobody. And the brokenness has become his identity in a way that's both empowering and deeply sad. His damage makes him unique. It's the thing that separates him from all the other background characters who remain faceless and interchangeable. But it's also the thing that marks him, permanently, as someone who has been through something terrible. He can never blend in again. He can never go back to being invisible. The void took his anonymity, along with his wholeness, and gave him in return a kind of terrible visibility that he never wanted. This design choice is both practical and thematic. Practically, it makes Rob visually distinctive, immediately recognizable as someone who's been through something terrible. Thematically, it makes him a walking reminder that the void exists, and that escaping it comes at a cost. He's scarred by the experience of being forgotten. He wears his trauma in his physical form, visible to everyone, impossible to hide. Every time another character looks at him, they're looking at evidence of the void's power. And every time they look away, they're choosing not to think about what that evidence means. Rob's transformation from forgotten background character to self-aware antagonist is one of the most quietly brilliant pieces of storytelling in modern animation. It works on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it's a compelling villain origin story, a nobody who becomes a somebody through sheer force of resentment. On a deeper level, it's a meditation on narrative itself, on what it means to be a character in a story, on what happens to the people the camera doesn't follow, the lives the script doesn't bother to write. Rob eventually becomes the only character in the show who is fully aware that Elmore is a fictional world. He understands that they're all characters in a television program. He knows that their lives are governed not by physics or free will, but by scripts and storyboards and the decisions of people they can never see. And this knowledge, this terrible, isolating knowledge, becomes both his weapon and his curse. In The Disaster, the Season 4 finale, and the rerun, the Season 5 premiere, Rob obtains a universal remote control that allows him to manipulate reality itself. He pauses time, rewinds events, changes aspect ratios, manipulates subtitles, all of it presented as literal control over the medium of the show. He's not just breaking the fourth wall, he's weaponizing it, using the mechanics of television as instruments of revenge against a world that forgot he existed. But here's where Rob's story becomes genuinely mysterious and genuinely moving. Because despite everything, despite the anger and the resentment and the elaborate revenge schemes, Rob doesn't actually want to be a villain. He says so explicitly at various points in the series. He wanted to be a cute sidekick. He wanted to be part of the story in a positive way. He wanted to belong. And the tragedy of his character is that the narrative, the show itself, only had room for him as an antagonist. The role of the villain was the only role available, and he took it because the alternative was returning to the nothing he came from. And then, in the future, Season 6, Episode 34, Rob discovers something that shifts his entire purpose. He learns that a catastrophe is coming, that the void is going to consume Elmore entirely, that the world is going to end. And suddenly, the villain has a new mission. Not revenge, not destruction, salvation. He tries to warn everyone. He tries to save them. But his history as a villain means nobody trusts him, nobody listens, and his attempts to communicate the danger are dismissed as more scheming. This is where the show left Rob at the end of Season 6. A villain who became a hero. A forgotten character who discovered the truth about his world and tried to save it. A person whose entire existence was shaped by being ignored, making one last desperate attempt to be heard, and failing. That's not just a mystery. That's a tragedy. And the show knew it. What makes Rob's story so haunting is the unanswered question at its core. What was he before? Not before the void, but before the show. Was there ever a version of Rob who had a full life, a family, friends, a story of his own? Or was he always empty? Always a placeholder? Did the show create him as a nobody? Or did it take someone with the potential to be somebody and never give him the chance? The show can't answer this, because the answer would have to come from outside the fiction. Rob's tragedy is a product of the medium. He's a minor character in a television show, and minor characters don't get backstories unless someone decides to write them one. The show gave Rob enough awareness to understand his situation, but not enough power to change it. He can see the bars of his cage, but he can't break them. And that, more than any specific plot point, is what makes his story so compelling and so unresolved. His mystery isn't about what happened to him. It's about what it means to exist as a fictional being who knows he's fictional and can't do anything about it. It's worth noting how unusual this is in animation, or in any medium. Most fictional characters who discover they're fictional treat the revelation as a joke. A wink to the audience. A moment of levity before the story continues as normal. Rob doesn't treat it as a joke. He treats it as a crisis. As the single most important fact about his existence. A fact that recontextualizes everything he's ever experienced and everything he'll ever do. His self-awareness isn't a gimmick. It's a condition. An existential illness that he can never recover from because the diagnosis is correct. He really is fictional. The bars of his cage are real, and no amount of raging against them will make them disappear. Now let's go deeper, because the character mysteries are compelling, but they're personal. They're about individuals. What makes Gumball truly special, what separates it from virtually every other animated show of its era, are the world mysteries. The questions about Elmore itself, about the nature of reality in this strange, beautiful, terrifying place. Let's start with the most basic question, the one that hides in plain sight from the very first episode. Why do objects, animals, and humans all live together in Elmore? It sounds like such a simple question. And for the first season or two, it doesn't even register as a question. You accept Elmore the way you accept any cartoon world, on its own terms without demanding justification. Bugs. Bunny lives in a world where animals talk. SpongeBob lives in a world where sea creatures have jobs. Gumball lives in a world where everything is alive and everything coexists. Fine, that's the premise. You don't question the premise. But Gumball, uniquely among animated shows, eventually starts questioning its own premise. And once you start pulling that thread, once you start asking why a piece of toast can be friends with a dinosaur, the thread doesn't stop. It keeps going and going and going until you're holding a tangle of implications that the show never untangles. Think about it for a moment. Really think about it. In the world of Gumball, a 12-year-old blue cat goes to school alongside a walking banana, a sentient balloon, a ghost girl, a T-Rex, a piece of toast, a cloud, and what appears to be a normal human chin. The school is staffed by a baboon, a slug covered in fur, and a rainbow-colored cyclops. The town is populated by every conceivable category of being, animate and inanimate, organic and inorganic, real and impossible. And nobody questions it. Nobody asks how a society of such radically different beings can function. Nobody wonders why a paper bear can attend the same school as a living cactus. It's just how things are. Consider Terry, who is literally a piece of paper cut into the shape of a bear. She gets sick constantly and is terrified of germs, despite being made of paper. How does a piece of paper get a cold? How does a piece of paper attend school, take tests, have emotions? Consider Masami, who is a cloud, a literal cloud, floating through the hallways, participating in class, having social relationships. She's the daughter of the man who owns the Rainbow Factory, which somehow produces actual rainbows as a commercial product. Consider Carrie, who is a ghost, not a person who died and became a ghost, just a ghost. A being whose entire existence is defined by death, walking among the living, attending middle school. The show doesn't question any of this. It presents it all with a straight face, as matter-of-fact as a nature documentary describing the mating habits of penguins. And the refusal to question, the insistence on treating the absurd as normal, is what makes the absurdity feel so profound, because it forces you to do the questioning. It trusts you to notice the impossibility and sit with it, to feel the strangeness that the characters themselves cannot perceive. The show reinforces this cosmic diversity through its animation. Gumball uses multiple visual styles simultaneously. Two-dimensional vector-based characters walk through three-dimensional CGI environments. Puppets share scenes with cartoon drawings. Live-action photographs serve as backgrounds for animated foregrounds. The visual language of the show is as heterogeneous as its population, as if the world itself was assembled from spare parts, stitched together from incompatible sources, and held together by nothing more than the collective agreement of its inhabitants to not question it. This visual diversity is one of the show's most distinctive features, and it's also, if you look at it from the right angle, one of its most unsettling. Because the characters don't just look different from each other. They look like they come from different shows, different mediums, different realities. A two-dimensional drawing interacts with a three-dimensional model in front of a live-action photograph, and nobody blinks. The aesthetic inconsistency isn't a stylistic choice in the conventional sense. It's a statement about the nature of Elmore itself. This is a world that was built from mismatched parts. A collage, not a painting. A remix, not an original composition. And the seams show. The joins are visible. The incompatibility of the elements is right there on the surface, for anyone who cares to look. What does that mean about Elmore's origin? Was it created like a piece of art, assembled from available materials? Was it generated like a dream, from the unconscious mind of someone or something? Was it accidental, a collision of incompatible realities that somehow fused into a functioning world? The show never says. The visual chaos of Elmore is presented as its natural state, its default condition, as unremarkable to its inhabitants as the sky or the ground. But to the viewer, watching from outside, the chaos is a clue, a hint that Elmore isn't what it seems. That underneath the bright colors and the funny characters and the slapstick comedy, something very strange is going on. And the show never explains why. Not once. Not even obliquely. The coexistence of objects, animals, and humans in Elmore is presented as a given, as a foundational truth that requires no justification and permits no investigation. You might as well ask why the sky is blue. It just is. But the absence of an explanation is itself a kind of mystery, because it implies that either there is no explanation, that Elmore's diversity is simply the default state of its reality, or there is an explanation and nobody has found it yet. And as the show gets more meta, more self-aware, more willing to question the nature of its own reality, the absence of an answer to this most basic question becomes more and more conspicuous. Ben Bacalé, the show's creator, has spoken about this aspect of the show's design. He's described it as reflecting the diversity of the real world, taken to its logical extreme. In the real world, people of different sizes, shapes, backgrounds, and capabilities coexist in shared spaces. Elmore does the same thing, just with the differences amplified to the point of absurdity. A classroom that contains a T-Rex and a piece of toast is not fundamentally different, in Bacalé's view, from a classroom that contains a 6-foot basketball player and a 4-foot violinist. The differences are bigger, but the principle is the same. That's a generous reading, and it's probably the intended one. But it doesn't actually explain anything about how Elmore functions on a practical level. How do you build a society when its citizens include sentient food, immortal ghosts, living fire, and ordinary humans? How does the economy work? How does the legal system function? How does anyone agree on anything when the basic categories of existence are so wildly different? The show plays these questions for comedy, and the comedy is brilliant. But underneath the comedy, the questions remain unanswered, possibly unanswerable. A foundation of absurdity on which everything else is built. There's also the Awesome Store, a recurring location that raises its own set of questions. The store is a van, or sometimes a shop, that appears in the mall parking lot and sells impossible items. Magical notebooks, evil turtles, universal remote controls, things that shouldn't exist and that have effects far beyond what their appearance would suggest. The inside of the store is bigger than the outside, warping space in a way that suggests it doesn't obey the same physical laws as the rest of Elmore. The store is run by a figure known only as the Shady Man, a mysterious figure whose intentions are never made clear. Is he a shopkeeper, a collector, a guardian of dangerous artifacts, a tempter, offering powerful tools to characters who can't handle them? The show uses the Awesome Store as a convenient plot device, a way to introduce new elements into the story, but it never explains what the store actually is. Where do the items come from? Who makes them? Why are they being sold in a parking lot in a suburban town? And why does the Shady Man seem to know more about the nature of Elmore's reality than anyone else? In the revival series, Rob becomes the new keeper of the Awesome Store, working alongside the Shady Man. But even this development raises more questions than it answers. If the Awesome Store is connected to the Void, if it contains items that can rewrite reality, if it operates outside the normal rules of Elmore's physics, then it's not just a shop. It's a node, a junction point between the fiction and whatever lies behind it. And the people who control it, whoever they are, have a kind of power that nobody else in Elmore possesses. And then there's the Void. The Void might be the single most important concept in all of Gumball, and it's also the most profoundly unresolved. It's introduced in Season 3, Episode 12, in the episode that shares its name. And from the moment it appears, It changes everything about how you understand the world of the show. The void is a dimension, a place, a space between spaces that exists underneath or alongside or beyond the normal reality of Elmore. It's filled with television static, warped physics, and the accumulated refuse of a world that edits itself. Things that are considered mistakes, things that are boring, things that are forgotten. They don't simply cease to exist. They're sent to the void, stored there, trapped. And the void has rules, though the show never fully articulates what those rules are. It seems to have a kind of intelligence, or at least a kind of intentionality. It decides what qualifies as a mistake. It enforces the erasure. And when Gumball and Darwin rescue Molly from the void fights back, trying to pull them in, trying to prevent them from disrupting its system of removal. When Gumball and Darwin first enter the void to rescue Molly, what they find is both comical and deeply eerie. The void contains pop culture relics: disco, mullets, laser discs, pogo balls. All the things that the broader culture decided were no longer relevant, sent to a liminal space where they continue to exist but can no longer be perceived. It's a graveyard for trends, a purgatory for the passé. And the implication is unsettling. If the void can consume fads and forgotten characters, what else can it consume? Where does it stop? Is there anything in Elmore that's truly permanent? Or is everything one bad day away from being deemed a mistake and erased from existence? There's also the question of the void's relationship to time. Things in the void seem to be frozen, preserved in the state they were in when they were consumed. The dated pop culture relics don't age or decay. They just exist, suspended, waiting. For what? For someone to remember them? For the world to decide they're relevant again? For the void to release them back into reality, the way it tried to prevent Gumball and Darwin from rescuing Molly? And what about the people in the void? Not just Rob, who escaped and was changed by the experience, but everyone else. All the characters who were consumed and never rescued. Are they conscious? Are they aware of being trapped? Are they floating in that static, that endless gray noise, knowing that they've been forgotten, but unable to do anything about it? The show doesn't address this, but the implication is deeply uncomfortable. If the void is a prison for mistakes, then its inmates are serving life sentences for the crime of not being interesting enough. The show never answers these questions. It introduces the void, uses it as a plot device in several episodes, ties it into Rob's backstory and the series' overarching meta-narrative, and then leaves its fundamental nature unexplained. Who created the void? What determines what counts as a mistake? Is the void natural, like gravity, or artificial, like a prison? Is it sentient? Is it malicious? Is it just a mechanism, doing what it was designed to do without understanding or intention? The void becomes increasingly important as the series progresses. In the future, Season 6, Episode 34, Rob discovers that the void is expanding, that it's going to consume Elmore entirely, that the world, their world, is running out of time. And Banana Barbara, the prophetic painter who can see the future, looks at her canvases and says something that might be the most haunting line in the entire series. There is no future. 4 words, delivered flatly, without emotion, by a character whose ability to see what's coming has been consistently verified by the show. Barbara has never been wrong before. Every painting she's made has come true, often in spite of the character's best efforts to prevent it. The Oracle, the Season 3 episode where her ability is first demonstrated, shows Gumball trying desperately to avoid the future Barbara has painted, only to cause the exact scenario through his attempts to prevent it. It's a classic self-fulfilling prophecy, the kind of temporal paradox that suggests the future isn't just predictable, but inevitable. So when Barbara says there is no future, the weight of that statement is enormous. She's not speculating. She's not guessing. She's reporting. She has looked ahead, the way she always looks ahead, And this time, instead of seeing events, she sees nothing. The absence of events. The end of the timeline. The place where the road stops. And the show cuts to static. The same static that fills the void. The visual language of erasure, of deletion, of the space between channels where nothing exists. It's one of the most unsettling moments in the entire series, delivered without fanfare, without dramatic music, without any of the usual signals that a big moment is happening. Just a calm woman, a flat statement, and the sudden intrusion of nothing into a world that has always been so full of everything. And then the screen cuts to static, and a face appears. The face of Superintendent Evil, who will later turn out to be Rob in disguise. And the episode ends. There is no future. What does that mean? Those 4 words could mean so many things, and the show refuses to clarify which meaning it intends. Is the void going to consume everything? Is the show itself going to end? And with it, the world it created? Is Barbara seeing the literal cancellation of her own reality? The moment when the screens go dark and the characters stop existing because there's no one left to watch them? The show doesn't tell us. It drops those 4 words into the narrative and leaves them there, ticking like a bomb that never goes off. And Barbara's paintings themselves are a mystery within a mystery. Her ability to paint the future is introduced in The Oracle, Season 3, Episode 31, and it's treated as genuine within the show's reality. She paints events before they happen, and those events come true. But the mechanism of her ability is never explained. Why can she do this? How does she see things that haven't happened yet? And most importantly, if she can see the future, and the future is nothing, does that mean the future can't be changed? And there's the connection between Barbara and the void that the show suggests, but never explains. In the future, when Rob forces Barbara to paint what's coming, her canvases fill with static. The same static that characterizes the void. As if the void isn't just a place, but a force. Something that's approaching. Something that's going to consume everything. Barbara's paintings have always been accurate. They've always come true. And now her paintings show static. Show nothing. Show the end. The connection between the prophetic artist and the dimension of erasure is one of the most tantalizing threads in the entire series. Can Barbara see the void because her mind operates on a different frequency than everyone else's? Is her burnout, her apparent deterioration, actually a side effect of perceiving too much reality rather than too little? Is she broken because she sees things the world doesn't want seen? The way Rob is broken because he knows things the world doesn't want known? These questions form a pattern. Throughout the series, the characters who know the most, who see the most, who understand the most about the true nature of Elmore are the ones who suffer the most. Rob is disfigured. Barbara is apparently brain damaged. The void consumes the aware. Knowledge in Elmore isn't power, it's punishment. The show uses Barbara's ability sparingly but effectively. She's not a major character. She appears in a handful of episodes, mostly in the background. But every time she appears, she brings with her this quiet sense of dread. This reminder that someone in this colorful, chaotic, hilarious world can see what's coming, and what she sees terrifies her. Her paintings are beautiful and prophetic and deeply unsettling, and the show never fully explores what they mean or where they come from. And there's something particularly poignant about the way the other characters treat Barbara. They mostly ignore her. They dismiss her paintings as the products of a confused mind, the ramblings of someone who isn't quite all there. Her husband, Banana Joe's father, seems to have accepted her condition as permanent and mostly works around it. The other residents of Elmore barely acknowledge her existence. She's a background character in every sense, present but unattended to, speaking truths that nobody wants to hear to an audience that isn't listening. There's a metaphor in that, if you want to find one. The person who sees the truth most clearly is the one who is listened to least. The prophet who can see the end of the world is dismissed as unstable, as confused, as someone whose grip on reality is weaker than everyone else's, when in fact the opposite is true. Barbara's grip on reality is stronger than anyone's. She sees more of it than anyone else can. And what she sees is so overwhelming, so vast, so incompatible with the pleasant fiction of daily life that her mind has been stretched beyond its capacity to contain it. She's not broken because she sees too little. She's broken because she sees too much. Let's talk about the money, because this episode does something that very few shows have ever attempted, and what it reveals about Elmore's reality is genuinely disturbing. The money is from season 3, and its premise sounds straightforward. The Wattersons run out of money. They can't pay their bills. They're facing financial ruin. Standard sitcom material. Except in Gumball, financial ruin doesn't just mean losing your house or eating ramen. It means the show itself starts falling apart. When the Wattersons lose their money, the animation quality degrades. Literally. The colors drain from the screen. The detailed CGI backgrounds revert to crude paper designs. Characters lose their smooth animation and become rough, sketchy, barely rendered. The show regresses through its own production stages, moving from finished product to storyboard to post-it note planning stage to nothing. The world doesn't just become impoverished, it becomes unfinished, incomplete, as if the budget that pays the Wattersons' bills is the same budget that pays for the show's animation. When Gumball agrees to do a commercial for Joyful Burger, everything returns to normal. The colors come back. The animation smooths out. The world reassembles itself. Money in Elmore isn't just a medium of exchange. It's the fabric of reality. Without it, the world literally cannot sustain itself. It's one of the show's most audacious visual sequences. Watching the animation deteriorate in real time, watching the world literally come apart as its financial foundation crumbles, is both hilarious and disturbing. The colors don't just fade, they drain, as if someone is pulling the plug on reality itself. The characters don't just become less detailed, they regress through every stage of the creative process, from finished animation to rough keyframes to pencil sketches to scribbles on scraps of paper. It's like watching a time-lapse of creation played in reverse, except the creation is the character's entire world. And the moment Gumball agrees to the commercial, everything snaps back. Instantly. Fully. As if nothing happened. The world was on the verge of ceasing to exist, and a fast food sponsorship deal pulled it back from the brink. The message is simultaneously cynical and honest. Reality costs money. Existence has a price tag, and if the price isn't paid, existence ends. This is played for comedy, and it is funny. But it's also profoundly unsettling if you think about it for more than a few seconds, because it implies that Elmore's reality is not self-sustaining. It requires funding. It requires resources from somewhere outside itself to continue existing. And the characters, whether they know it or not, are dependent on forces beyond their comprehension for the very continuation of their world. The implications ripple outward from there. Who pays for Elmore? Where does the budget come from? Is it a literal television budget, with the character's existence dependent on the show's ratings and commercial revenue? Or is it something more abstract? A metaphor for the idea that every world, every reality, requires energy and investment to maintain itself. The show doesn't say. It shows you the mechanism and leaves the interpretation to you. And then there's The Shippening, Season 6, Episode 14, which takes the show's meta-awareness to perhaps its most disturbing conclusion. In this episode, Sarah, a background character who has always been depicted as an obsessive fan of Gumball and Darwin, finds a mysterious notebook. Not just any notebook. A notebook with a Cartoon Network logo on it. A notebook that, when written in, causes whatever is written to become reality. Sarah uses the notebook to write romantic fanfiction. And the fanfiction comes true. Characters who would never have romantic interest in each other are suddenly drawn together. Relationships form and dissolve based on Sarah's whims. The entire social fabric of Elmore is rewritten by a background character with a magic notebook and a lot of feelings about ships. The comedy is there, and it's sharp, but the implications are staggering. A Cartoon Network branded notebook that rewrites reality. A prop that seems to be, for all intents and purposes, a script. The actual script of the show, sitting inside the show, being used by a character within the show to change the show. It's recursion. It's the snake eating its own tail. And it raises the most uncomfortable question the show has ever asked. If someone inside Elmore can rewrite reality by writing in a notebook, then what does that make the people who write the actual show? What is the relationship between the creators and the created? Between the writers in the real world and the characters who exist, suffer, love, and fear inside the world those writers built? The show doesn't answer this. It can't answer this, because answering it would require the characters to fully understand their own fictional nature, and the show stops just short of that recognition, hovering at the edge of total awareness without quite tipping over. There's a fascinating tension in the way the show handles the notebook. On one hand, it's clearly a comedy episode. Sarah's fanfiction is ridiculous, the romantic pairings are absurd, and the escalation from mild shipping to total narrative chaos is played for maximum laughs. On the other hand, the notebook's existence implies something profound and terrifying about the nature of authorship in Elmore. If what's written becomes real, then reality is literally a text. It can be read, edited, revised, deleted. The characters' lives are not lives at all. They're drafts, subject to revision at any time, by anyone with access to the right notebook. And the Cartoon Network logo on the cover. That detail is easy to miss, but it's the most important element of the whole episode, because it suggests that the notebook came from outside, from the real world, from the network that produces the show. It's a prop from behind the fourth wall, a piece of the production apparatus that somehow fell into the fiction. And its presence there, inside the story, changes everything about how you understand the relationship between the show and its world. If the notebook is from Cartoon Network, and the notebook controls reality, then Cartoon Network controls reality. The network isn't just broadcasting Elmore, it's writing it, creating it, sustaining it moment by moment through the act of storytelling, and the characters, whether they know it or not, exist at the pleasure of the people who hold the pen. But it gets close. Closer than almost any other animated show has ever gotten. And the episodes where it gets closest are the ones that form the backbone of Gumball's deepest, most unresolved mystery. The show becoming aware of itself. This is the big one. The mystery that contains all the other mysteries. Because if the characters are aware, even partially, that they exist inside a television show, then every other mystery in the series takes on a different meaning. The void isn't just a dimension. It's the bin where deleted scenes go. The character disappearances aren't just production decisions. They're acts of narrative violence, characters removed from existence by the stroke of a pen. The family inconsistencies aren't just continuity errors. They're rewrites, patches, updates to a script that keeps being revised by someone the characters can never see. And the question of whether this awareness was planned from the beginning or evolved organically over the course of the series is itself a mystery. Because the answer changes everything about how you interpret the show. If the meta-awareness was planned from the start, then every early episode exists in a different light. Every seemingly innocent joke, every casual fourth wall break, was actually a breadcrumb leading toward the revelation that the character's world is fictional. The show was always building toward this. It just took 3 seasons to reveal its hand. If the meta-awareness evolved over time, then the show is a different kind of achievement. It's a creative work that discovered its own deepest theme while in the process of making itself. The writers started with a cartoon about a funny cat and his goldfish brother, and gradually realized that the world they'd built had implications they hadn't anticipated. And instead of ignoring those implications, they leaned into them, following the logic of their own creation until it led them somewhere genuinely profound. Either way, the result is the same. A children's cartoon that asks, with increasing urgency and sophistication, what it means to be real. The meta-awareness of Gumball didn't happen all at once. In the early seasons, the show was a comedy. A bright, fast, visually inventive comedy that broke the fourth wall, occasionally for jokes, but didn't dwell on the implications. Characters would look at the camera, acknowledge the audience, make a quip about commercial breaks. Standard cartoon stuff. No different from what Bugs Bunny was doing 70 years ago. But somewhere around season 3, something shifted. The fourth wall breaks stopped being jokes and started being arguments. The show began to interrogate its own existence, to question the nature of the world it had created, to probe the boundary between fiction and reality, with a seriousness that was completely at odds with its surface-level silliness. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the shift happened. There isn't a single episode where the show crosses from comedy to philosophy. Instead, there's a gradual accumulation. A joke here about the characters being aware of commercial breaks. A visual gag there about the animation style changing when the budget drops. A throwaway line about how nothing in Elmore ever changes, delivered with just enough weight to make you wonder if it's a joke or a statement of fact. And then slowly, episode by episode, the accumulated weight of these moments becomes impossible to ignore. The show isn't just breaking the fourth wall, it's examining the wall, studying its construction, asking what the wall is made of, who built it, and what happens on the other side. This evolution is, I think, one of the great achievements of the series, because it happened naturally. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like the writers decided in a meeting to make the show more philosophical. It felt like the show itself was growing, developing a consciousness, becoming aware of its own nature the way a child becomes aware of itself. The meta-awareness wasn't imposed on the show. It emerged from it, organically, as a natural consequence of having built a world so strange and so internally contradictory that the only way to make sense of it was to acknowledge that it was fiction. The Void introduced the idea that Elmore has an editing function, that it actively removes things it considers mistakes. The Nobody introduced the idea that a character can become aware that they have no role in the narrative and respond to that awareness with resentment and rage. The Signal, Season 4, Episode 23, introduced visual glitches and broadcast interference as literal events within the show's reality, as if the transmission of the show was itself a physical phenomenon that the characters could perceive and be affected by. And then came the disaster and the rerun, the Season 4 finale and the Season 5 premiere, which together represent the most sustained and ambitious piece of metafiction in the show's history. In these episodes, Rob gets hold of a universal remote control, purchased, naturally, from the Awesome Store. Not a television remote control, though that's what it looks like. A universal remote. A device that controls everything. With it, Rob can pause time, rewind events, fast forward through scenes, change the aspect ratio of reality itself. He uses the remote to manipulate the world, to hurt Gumball, to take revenge for being forgotten. And the show depicts this not as a character using a weapon, but as a character controlling a television show. Because that's what it is. The remote controls the show. The show is the world. The world is the show. They're the same thing. The implications of this are vast and terrifying, and the show knows it. When Rob changes the aspect ratio, the world physically distorts. Characters are stretched, compressed, forced into shapes that aren't natural to them. When he rewinds, events unhappen, people undie, moments unexist. When he pauses, everything freezes, and he walks through a world of statues, the only moving thing in a reality that has been stopped by someone with a remote. This isn't just clever. This is existentially horrifying. It means that the characters' lives are not their own. That everything they experience, every choice they make, every emotion they feel, can be rewound, erased, or altered by someone with the right tool. That their reality is as mutable as a videotape, and they are at the mercy of whoever holds the remote. And yet the show presents this with a lightness, a playfulness, that prevents it from tipping into despair. It's scary, but it's also funny. It's existentially troubling, but it's also thrilling. The show trusts its audience to hold both feelings simultaneously, to feel the comedy and the horror at the same time, and to not need the tension between them resolved. There's a moment in the rerun that sticks with me. Rob is using the remote to manipulate reality, and Gumball is trying to stop him. And at one point, the show itself seems to malfunction. The frame rate drops, the audio distorts, the characters glitch and skip like a buffering video stream. And for a few seconds, you genuinely can't tell whether this is intentional, whether it's part of the episode's design, or whether something has actually gone wrong with your playback. That moment is genius because it collapses the distance between the viewer and the fiction. For those few seconds, the instability of Elmore's reality becomes the instability of your viewing experience. The character's existential crisis becomes your technical crisis. The boundary between what's happening in the show and what's happening on your screen dissolves, and you're left in a genuinely disorienting space where fiction and reality overlap. That trust is what makes Gumball's meta-narrative so effective. The show never tells you how to feel about the revelation that its world is fictional. It doesn't frame it as tragedy or comedy, as liberation or imprisonment. It frames it as a fact, a strange, wonderful, terrible fact that you can respond to however you want. And then it moves on, leaving you to process it alone, at your own pace, in your own way. And that's what separates Gumball from other shows that have played with meta-awareness. Plenty of cartoons break the fourth wall. Plenty of shows have characters wink at the camera, or acknowledge the audience, or reference the fact that they're on television. But those moments are almost always played as jokes, isolated gags that exist outside the show's internal logic. They're momentary glitches in the fiction that are immediately sealed over. The fourth wall breaks, and then it's repaired, and everyone moves on as if nothing happened. Gumball doesn't repair the wall. It breaks it, and then it examines the cracks, and then it breaks it some more. Each meta moment builds on the ones before it, creating a cumulative effect that transforms the entire show from a comedy into something much stranger and much more difficult to categorize. By the time you reach the later seasons, the fourth wall isn't a wall anymore. It's a membrane, a thin, permeable barrier that the characters can feel through, that they press against, that occasionally tears just enough for them to glimpse what's on the other side before it reseals itself. And the question that haunts the show's final seasons is whether that membrane will hold, whether the fiction can sustain itself once the characters become aware that it is fiction, whether a story can continue to function as a story once the people inside it understand that they're in a story. It's a question that the show poses with increasing urgency and never answers, because answering it would either require the membrane to hold permanently or to break completely, and neither outcome serves the show's purposes as well as the ambiguity does. And there's The Signal, Season 4, Episode 23, which might be the most technically innovative episode in the series. The episode features unexplained disruptions in Gumball and Darwin's conversation. Words are replaced. Sentences are rearranged. Audio cuts out and returns with different content, as if someone is editing their dialogue in real time. The visual glitches accompany the audio ones, with the screen tearing, freezing, and pixelating like a malfunctioning broadcast signal. At first, Gumball attributes the disruptions to poor phone reception, but as the episode progresses, the disruptions become more severe, more intentional feeling. They start to seem less like technical errors and more like interference. like something or someone is intercepting the transmission of their lives and altering it. The episode never fully explains what's happening. It presents the glitches as real phenomena within the character's experience and leaves the cause ambiguous. Is the broadcast signal of their reality weakening? Is someone editing the show in real time? Is Elmore's fabric fraying at the edges? The episode poses the question through its form rather than its content, using the medium of television to interrogate the nature of televised reality. The meta-awareness builds throughout seasons 4, 5, and 6, accumulating like snow on a rooftop, getting heavier and heavier until you start to wonder how much more the structure can bear. Episodes reference earlier episodes not as callbacks, but as evidence. Characters notice patterns in their own lives that suggest predetermined narrative structures. The world glitches, skips, repeats. Reality becomes unstable in ways that feel less like comedy and more like diagnosis. There's a particularly telling moment in one of the later episodes where a character notices that nobody in Elmore ever ages. The kids have been in middle school for years. The adults never get older. Time passes, events happen, seasons change, but the people stay the same. In any other show, this would just be the convention of the medium. Characters in animated series don't age because the show's format requires them to stay the same. It's a structural necessity that the audience agrees not to question. But Gumball questions it. Or rather, Gumball allows its characters to begin questioning it, to look at the unchanging nature of their existence and start to feel the wrongness of it. Not as a joke, not as a meta gag, as a genuine source of existential discomfort. Why don't we age? Why don't we change? Why does everything feel like it's running on a loop? The answer, of course, is that they're characters in a television show, and television shows maintain the status quo because that's what episodic storytelling requires. But within the fiction, within the experience of the characters themselves, the absence of change isn't a convention. It's a horror. It's the discovery that your life isn't linear, but cyclical. That you're not moving forward, but repeating. That the future Barbara can't see isn't empty because it hasn't been written yet. It's empty because it was never going to be written. Because the loop was always going to continue until someone turned off the machine. And that's the deepest, most unsettling implication of Gumball's meta-awareness. Not that the characters are fictional, but that they're trapped. That their existence is a kind of prison, governed by rules they can barely perceive, controlled by forces they can never meet, subject to revision and deletion without warning or consent. The void doesn't consume characters because they're mistakes. It consumes them because the narrative has no more use for them. And the narrative is merciless. It doesn't care about the characters' feelings. It doesn't care about their histories or their relationships or their hopes. It cares about entertaining the audience. And when a character stops being entertaining, the void opens, and they're gone. There's also the question of Gumball's name, which the show addresses directly in Season 3, Episode 7, an episode called The Name. Gumball discovers that his birth certificate reads Zach Christopher Watterson. Gumball isn't his name. It's never been his name. He's been going by a nickname his entire life, and nobody, including his own parents, ever mentioned it. The discovery triggers something unexpected. Gumball develops an alter ego. Zach, a confident, aggressive, entirely different personality who begins to overwrite Gumball's memories and identity. It's played partly for comedy and partly for genuine horror, because the implication is that names have power in Elmore, that identity is mutable, that the person you think you are can be rewritten by the person you used to be. Gumball defeats Zach by legally changing his name, officially becoming Gumball Watterson through the town hall system. The episode resolves its immediate plot, but it leaves a deeper question unanswered. If Gumball's identity can be overwritten by a name change, then how stable is anyone's identity in Elmore? Are the characters' personalities genuinely their own, or are they assigned? Is Gumball Gumball because that's who he really is? Or because that's the name he chose, and the name shapes the person? The show touches this question and moves on, but it lingers. The idea that you are who you're called, that a name can contain a personality, that identity is something that can be lost and reclaimed, is one of the show's most quietly unsettling ideas. And then there's the question of what happened at Chanax Inc. Banana Barbara's backstory, revealed in the future, includes the detail that she used to be competent and sharp-minded before an internship at a company called Chanax Inc. caused severe burnout that left her in her current state. Chanax is also the name of the real-world animation studio that produces the amazing world of Gumball. The implication is staggering. A character within the show was broken by working at the company that makes the show. The fiction is eating its own production. The meta-awareness has reached the point where the show's real-world creators are being implicated in the suffering of their own characters. Was this just a clever Easter egg? An in-joke for the production team? Or was it something more deliberate? A statement about the relationship between creators and created, about what it costs to exist inside someone else's creative vision? The show never explains. It drops the reference and walks away, leaving you to wonder whether you were meant to notice. And then it all comes together in the finale. The Inquisition, Season 6, Episode 44. The last episode of the original series. And if you've been paying attention, if you've been tracking the Void and Rob and the meta-awareness and the prophecies and the glitches, then what happens in the Inquisition is simultaneously the most satisfying and the most frustrating conclusion imaginable. A man arrives at Elmore Junior High, a live-action man in a world of cartoons. He calls himself Superintendent Evil, which is not subtle, and he announces that he's there to eliminate the cartoonish and nonsensical elements from the school. He wants to make everything normal, rational, real. He wants to turn the characters into humans. The students resist. Some of them fight. Others are confused, not understanding what's happening or why this strange live-action man wants to change them. The teachers, characteristically, comply without much resistance. Authority figures in Gumball have always been useless, which is itself a kind of commentary on the nature of institutional power in the show's world. When crisis arrives, the adults fold. The children have to save themselves. And gradually, the transformation begins. Characters start changing. The colorful, absurd, impossible world of Elmore starts becoming something else. Something flatter. Something duller. Something that looks like the real world. And then Rob reveals himself. The superintendent is Rob in disguise. And he's not trying to destroy them. He's trying to save them. He's trying to transform everyone into humans so they can escape to what he calls the other place. A place beyond the show. A place where they might survive whatever is coming. But before he can explain, before he can finish his warning, before anyone can understand what he's really saying, Tina uses her tail to knock him unconscious. Rob loses his grip. The floor opens beneath him. He falls into the void, screaming that it started, and the screen goes black. That's it. That's the ending. The screen goes dark, and the credits begin, and the show is over. I remember the first time I saw it. The silence afterwards. Not the silence of a show that had ended satisfactorily, where you sit back and sigh and feel complete. The silence of something amputated. Something cut off mid-sentence. You wait for the post-credits scene, for the stinger, for some indication that what you just watched wasn't actually the end. And it doesn't come. There's nothing. Just the Cartoon Network logo and the schedule for whatever comes on next, as if the biggest unanswered question in the history of animated television is just another show wrapping up its time slot. The viewing experience of that final episode is itself a kind of mystery, because the show conditioned its audience over 6 seasons to expect resolution, even if that resolution was messy or comedic or deliberately unsatisfying. Episodes ended. Conflicts resolved. The status quo was restored. That's how Gumball worked. That's how episodic television works. And then, at the very end, the show broke its own pattern. It started a conflict and didn't resolve it. It asked a question and didn't answer it. It opened a door and walked the audience through it, and then closed the door behind them, leaving them in the dark with nothing but the question for company. No resolution. No explanation. No final scene of the characters safe and sound. Crisis averted. Lessons learned. Just darkness. Just silence. Just the absence of everything that Elmore was, replaced by the thing Elmore was always afraid of becoming. Nothing. Now, to be fair, the show didn't end by accident. Ben Bacalé, the creator, designed this ending deliberately. It was a cliffhanger, intended to set up a continuation, potentially a movie or a new series. A Gumball movie was originally planned for HBO Max, but it was canceled in August 2022 during a management transition at the company. Bacalé has since indicated the movie isn't permanently dead, just in limbo, in debate, being rethought. And a continuation did eventually arrive, in the form of The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which premiered on Hulu in July 2025 and on Cartoon Network and HBO Max in October 2025. The revival addresses some of what the Inquisition set up, including Rob's fate, with a finale called The Rewrite that finds Rob rescued from the void by the owner of the awesome store, taking on a new role as the shop's keeper. But the revival doesn't resolve everything. It can't. Because the mysteries of Gumball aren't the kind that can be answered with plot points and dialogue. They're structural. They're philosophical. They exist in the space between the show and its audience, in the relationship between fiction and reality, in the question of what it means for a world to continue when nobody's looking at it. And for the years between the original series ending and the revival beginning, the darkness at the end of the Inquisition was all there was. That gap, those years of silence, was itself a kind of mystery. A period during which Elmore existed only in memory, only in rewatches, only in the conversations of fans who couldn't stop wondering what had happened after the screen went dark. And even now, even with the revival series expanding the story, the emotional impact of that ending hasn't diminished. Because the ending wasn't just a cliffhanger. It was a thesis statement. It was the show's final argument about the nature of its own existence. Think about what the Inquisition is actually saying. A character who knows he's fictional discovers that the fictional world is about to end. His solution is to transform everyone into something that can survive outside the fiction, to make them real, to help them escape the medium that contains them. And he fails. He falls into the void, the place where forgotten things go, and the world he was trying to save goes dark. And there's an additional layer of meaning in the fact that the superintendent wants to make everything normal, real, human, because in the logic of the show, normal means live action. Real means leaving the animated world behind. Human means becoming something the audience is, rather than something the audience watches. The transformation Rob is attempting isn't just a physical change. It's an ontological one. He's trying to move the characters from one level of reality to another, from fiction to something closer to fact, from the world inside the screen to the world outside it. That ambition is staggering. A fictional character, aware of his own fictionality, attempting to breach the barrier between animation and reality, trying to save his fellow characters by making them real. It's the most ambitious act any character in the show has ever attempted, and it fails. Not because it was impossible, but because the other characters didn't understand what he was trying to do and stopped him before he could finish. And there's the word Rob uses. The other place. He doesn't call it the real world. He doesn't call it reality. He calls it the other place, as if it's not more real than Elmore, but simply different. adjacent, an alternative location that might be able to sustain them when their own location can no longer sustain itself. What is the other place? Is it our world? The world of the viewers, the three-dimensional, live-action, non-animated reality that exists on this side of the screen? Or is it something else entirely? A third option. A place that is neither Elmore nor our world, but something in between. The show doesn't say. The phrase hangs in the air, evocative and undefined, a destination without coordinates. The show is telling you, in its final moments, that the characters know. They know, or at least Rob knows, that they exist inside something. That their world has edges. That beyond those edges, there's a place they can't reach, a reality they can't access, a continuation of existence that's available to some beings, but not to them. And the show ends with that knowledge hanging in the air, unresolved, unanswered, as the screen fills with the same darkness that fills the void. Is Elmore still running? Did the characters continue their lives after the camera stopped rolling? Is there a version of Gumball and Darwin and Nicole and Richard and Penny and all the rest who are still out there somewhere, going to school, getting into trouble, living their strange and wonderful and impossible lives, even though nobody is watching? Or did they stop? Did they freeze? Mid-motion, mid-thought, mid-sentence, like the characters in a paused video? Did they know? Was there a moment of awareness before the darkness came? A flicker of understanding that this was it, that the story was over, that whatever came next was beyond their ability to influence or perceive? Or did they stop? Did the screen going dark mean the end of everything? Did the characters cease to exist the moment the show ceased to exist? Did Elmore fold up like a stage set after the last performance? Lights off, props stored, actors dismissed? The show doesn't tell us. It can't tell us. Because answering that question would require the show to exist after it ended, to peer beyond its own borders and report back on what it found. And it can't do that. No show can. The ending is, by definition, the point beyond which the show has nothing more to say. But Gumball, more than most shows, made the audience feel the weight of that silence. Because it spent its final seasons teaching us that the characters were aware, that they could sense the borders of their world, that they understood, on some level, that they existed inside a narrative that could be paused, rewound, canceled, and then it ended, and the awareness continued in us, in the audience, in the people who were left sitting in the dark wondering what happened to the people we'd been watching. Rob knew. That's maybe the most important thing. Of all the characters in the show, Rob was the one who understood. He knew the world was fictional. He knew it was ending. And rather than accepting that knowledge passively, rather than retreating into denial or despair, he acted on it. He tried to save everyone, tried to transform them into something that could survive the cancellation, tried to give them a form that could exist in the other place, whatever that means. He took the most terrifying knowledge a fictional character can possess, the knowledge that you are fiction, and he turned it into a mission, a purpose, a reason to keep going even when going meant falling, and he failed. He fell into the void, screaming, as the world he was trying to save went dark around him. There's something unbearably sad about that. Something that transcends the usual sadness of a cartoon villain's defeat. A character who was forgotten by his own show, who clawed his way back from literal non-existence, who fought through the static and the emptiness to reclaim a place in the narrative, who discovered the truth about his reality, who tried to save everyone who had ever ignored him, and who failed at the last possible moment. Rob's arc is one of the most emotionally complex stories in modern animation, and it ends not with resolution, but with absence. A scream, a fall, darkness, and the question of whether he was right, whether transformation was really the answer, whether the other place is a real destination, or just the desperate hope of a doomed character, is one that the show leaves entirely open. The revival series picks up Rob's story, but the emotional weight of his fall, the way it felt in the moment when you watched it for the first time and didn't know there would be a continuation, that weight is permanent. It can't be undone by future episodes any more than the memory of a nightmare can be undone by waking up. That's the genius of Gumball's unresolved mysteries. They don't just exist within the show. They extend beyond it. They reach out through the screen and plant themselves in the viewer's mind, where they continue to grow long after the show is over. The mysteries aren't flaws. They aren't oversights. They're the show's final gift to its audience. A set of questions that keep the world alive in your imagination, even when the world itself has gone dark. There's a concept in philosophy called negative space. In visual art, it refers to the area around a subject rather than the subject itself. The empty space that defines the shape of the object it surrounds. A vase is defined as much by the air around it as by its own clay walls. A doorway is as much about the opening as the frame. Gumball's mysteries are the negative space of the show. They're the openings in the frame, the air around the vase. They define the shape of the show not by what they contain, but by what they don't. And that negative space, that carefully maintained emptiness, is what gives the show its depth. Without the mysteries, Gumball would be a flat image. Colorful and entertaining, but flat. With them, it's three-dimensional. It has depth and shadow and the suggestion of things hidden behind things visible. And I think that's why the show resonates so differently with adult viewers than it does with children. A child watching Gumball sees the bright colors, the physical comedy, the absurd situations, the funny voices. They might notice the mysteries, but they don't dwell on them. They accept the contradictions, the way they accept contradictions in their own lives, easily, without anxiety, because the world is still too new and too interesting to be troubled by inconsistency. An adult watching Gumball sees all of that too, but they also see the architecture beneath it. They see the deliberate choices, the careful placement of questions that never get answered, the way the show builds its world on a foundation of uncertainty and manages to make that uncertainty feel not like a weakness, but like a feature. They see the negative space, and they recognize it because they've encountered the same kind of negative space in their own lives. The questions about themselves that they've never been able to answer. The relationships they've never fully understood. The patterns in their own existence that suggest something structured and intentional, but that resist interpretation no matter how closely they're examined. Gumball holds a mirror up to the experience of being conscious in a world you don't fully understand. And the reflection it shows you isn't comforting, but it is honest. And sometimes honesty is more comforting than comfort, because that's what mysteries do. They keep you coming back. They keep you thinking. They keep the world real in your mind in a way that answers never could. If every question in Gumball had been answered, if every thread had been tied up, if every mystery had been resolved in a neat and satisfying way, the show would be finished, complete, closed, a thing you watched and enjoyed and put on a shelf. Instead, Gumball is unfinished, open, alive with possibility. It's a world that exists in the present tense, always, because there's always something left to discover, always a question left to ask, always a door that was left ajar in some episode you haven't rewatched recently enough to remember. And isn't that what a world should be? Not a finished product, sealed and complete and final, but a living thing, growing and changing and surprising even the people who think they know it best. Elmore is more real than most fictional worlds precisely because it's incomplete. Because the gaps in its fabric, the holes in its logic, the questions without answers, give it the texture of a real place. Real places are full of contradictions. Real places have mysteries that nobody has solved. Real places contain people whose stories are richer and deeper and more complicated than any outside observer will ever know. The questions that were never answered are still being asked by fans, by viewers, by people who stumble onto the show for the first time and feel that same quiet unease when they realize how much was left unsaid. The mysteries keep Elmore breathing. They keep the characters moving. They keep the world spinning, even in the dark, even when nobody's watching. And maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the mysteries were never mistakes or oversights or things the writers meant to address, but ran out of time for. Maybe they were the point itself, the destination, not the detour. Think about the shows you remember most vividly from childhood, not the ones that answered every question, the ones that left you wondering, the ones that planted a seed in your brain that grew for years, for decades, until the show itself became less a memory of something you watched and more a part of who you are. Those are the shows that matter. Those are the ones that last. Not because they gave you everything, but because they gave you just enough and trusted you to supply the rest. Maybe Ben Bacalé and his team understood something about storytelling that most creators miss. That the most powerful stories aren't the ones that answer every question. They're the ones that make you care enough about the questions to keep asking them. They're the ones that trust you to sit with uncertainty, to accept that not knowing is its own kind of knowledge, to understand that sometimes the best ending is no ending at all. Let me say it plainly, in case the slow build of this video has obscured the point. The amazing world of Gumball is one of the most ambitious and intellectually sophisticated animated series ever made. Not despite its mysteries, but because of them. Every unanswered question is a thread that connects the viewer to the show long after the final episode has aired. Every gap in the narrative is an invitation to keep thinking, keep wondering, keep caring about a world that, by all rights, should have been just another cartoon about funny animals. Gumball gave us a world that was impossible. A world where food and ghosts and dinosaurs and clouds went to school together. A world where reality could be rewound with a remote control and the animation quality depended on the character's bank balance. A world where a prophetic banana could paint the future and what she painted was nothing. A world where the void swallowed everything that wasn't good enough, and the characters gradually became aware that they lived inside a show. And the show ended with the lights going out and nobody knowing what happened next. And somehow, against all logic, against all expectations, that impossible world felt real. More real, in some ways, than the orderly, well-explained, carefully resolved worlds of shows that tied up every loose end. Because real life doesn't resolve. Real life is full of questions that never get answered, threads that never get tied, mysteries that persist until long after you've stopped looking for solutions. Real life is messy and incomplete and frustratingly open-ended. And Gumball, for all its cartoon absurdity, captured that truth better than almost anything else on television. The small mysteries, the ones about mascots and names and family histories, they remind you that even in a world you think you know, there are details that don't add up. That consistency is an illusion. That the closer you look at anything, the more contradictions you find. The character mysteries, the ones about Nicole's childhood, and Richard's father, and Penny's true nature, and Rob's tragic arc. They remind you that every person you meet is carrying stories you'll never hear. That the person sitting next to you on the bus, the barista who hands you your coffee, the neighbor you wave to but never really talk to, all of them have histories as complex and as unresolved as Nicole Watterson's. All of them are carrying wounds you can't see and questions you'll never be asked to answer. That the people closest to you have depths you'll never reach. That knowing someone is not the same as understanding them. And that understanding someone is not the same as knowing everything about them. The world mysteries, the ones about the void and the coexistence of species, and the nature of Elmore's reality, they remind you that the biggest questions are the ones we've stopped asking. That we live in a universe we don't understand, surrounded by phenomena we can't explain, operating under rules we've accepted without examination. That the world we live in is just as strange and inexplicable as Elmore, just as full of contradictions and impossibilities that we've learned to accept without questioning. That normal is not the same as explained. And the existential mysteries, the ones about the show's ending and the character's awareness, and the darkness that descended when the credits rolled, they remind you of the biggest mystery of all. The one that has nothing to do with Gumball and everything to do with being alive. Every story ends. That every world has borders. That the people and places you love, whether they're real or fictional, will eventually pass beyond the point where you can follow them. And that what remains, what always remains, is the questions. The questions are, what keep us coming back to Elmore? Not the answers we got, but the ones we didn't. Not the doors that were closed, but the ones that were left open. Not the endings, but the absences. The spaces where endings should have been, left empty, left quiet, left for us to fill with whatever we need them to contain. And that, I think, is the deepest mystery of all. Not any specific question the show asked, but the question of why the unanswered questions feel more valuable than the answered ones. Why the gaps in the story feel more important than the story itself. Why the silence at the end of the Inquisition, that long, dark, bottomless silence, says more about the show's meaning than any dialogue ever could. There's a word for what Gumball does with its mysteries. The word is apophysis. It means communicating through absence, saying something by not saying it, making a point by leaving a space where the point should be. It's what happens when a painting is more interesting for what it doesn't show than for what it does. When a piece of music is more moving for its silences than its notes. When a story is more powerful for its gaps than its resolutions. There's something else worth saying here. Something about the relationship between Gumball and its audience that I think explains why these mysteries resonate so deeply. The show was, for most of its run, categorized as a children's cartoon. It aired on Cartoon Network. Its target demographic was, nominally, kids between the ages of 6 and 14. And many of its viewers were children, watching it the way children watch cartoons, for the bright colors and the funny voices and the slapstick comedy. But the show was also something else. It was a philosophical text disguised as entertainment. It was a sustained meditation on the nature of reality, identity, and meaning, presented in a format that could reach children without condescending to them. And the mysteries, the unanswered questions, were the mechanism by which the show delivered its deeper content. They were the questions that children would absorb unconsciously and adults would notice consciously. The questions that would sit in a viewer's mind for years, growing and developing, becoming more complex as the viewer grew more complex. That's what the best children's entertainment does. It meets you where you are and grows with you. It gives you something at age 8 that you don't fully understand. And then you come back at 18 and suddenly the thing you didn't understand clicks into place. And you realize the show was always smarter than you thought. Gumball is full of those moments. Moments that register as funny when you're young and as profound when you're older. And the mysteries, the unresolved questions, are the most powerful examples of this. Because a mystery that you encounter at 8 and still can't solve at 28 has a special kind of power. It's been with you for your entire conscious life. It's part of your intellectual furniture. And the fact that it remains unsolved isn't frustrating. It's familiar. It's comforting, in a strange way. Like an old friend who still has the ability to surprise you. Gumball is a work of apophysis. Its mysteries aren't accidents. They're architecture. They're the load-bearing walls of a structure designed to remain standing even after the roof is removed. The show built itself around its own incompleteness, and that incompleteness is what gives it its shape. So that's the journey. From Darwin's contradictory name to the darkness at the end of everything. From the small mysteries to the enormous ones. From mascots and names and family contradictions to the void and the end of everything. From the fun, silly questions that make you smile to the deep, quiet ones that make you stare at the ceiling in the dark. Gumball left us with more questions than answers. And I think that was exactly the right choice. Because the answers would have been temporary. They would have satisfied us for a moment and then faded. But the questions are permanent. They live in the spaces between what was shown and what was meant, between what was said and what was left unsaid, between the last frame of the Inquisition and whatever comes after it. And the beautiful thing is that Elmore is still out there, in a way. Not just in the Revival series, which continues to build on the foundation Bacalé laid. Not just in the reruns, which introduce new viewers to the mysteries every day. Not just in the fan communities, where people who were children when the show started are now adults, still debating, still theorizing, still noticing things they missed the first time around. But in the minds of everyone who watched it and wondered. Everyone who noticed a contradiction and filed it away. Everyone who saw the screen go dark and thought, what happened next? Everyone who lay in bed after watching the finale and felt the weight of all those open doors, all those unfinished sentences, all those questions hanging in the air like stars. There's a Japanese concept called mono no aware, which translates roughly as the pathos of things, or an empathy toward things. It describes the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the recognition that the beauty of something is inseparable from its transience. Cherry blossoms are beautiful because they fall. Sunsets are beautiful because they end. And stories are beautiful because they stop. Gumball's unresolved mysteries are an expression of mono no aware. They're beautiful because they're impermanent, because they exist in the space between knowing and not knowing, between the answered and the unanswerable. They're cherry blossoms that never fall, sunsets frozen mid-descent, moments of not knowing preserved forever in the amber of the show's unfinished narrative. And maybe that's what Elmore is, ultimately. Not a place, not a cartoon, but a state of mind. A way of seeing the world that accepts its mysteries without needing to solve them. That finds beauty in the questions rather than the answers. That understands, at some deep and quiet level, that the things we don't know are more precious than the things we do. Elmore exists in the questions. It always has. And as long as we keep asking them, as long as we keep wondering about the void, and Rob's fate, and Nicole's childhood, and the strange, impossible, wonderful way that a banana and a ghost and a 12-year-old blue cat can all live in the same town, Elmore will keep existing. Not on a screen, not in a script, but in the place where all the best stories end up eventually. The imagination of the people who love them. And there's one final mystery I haven't mentioned yet, because I've been saving it. It's not a plot mystery, or a character mystery, or a world mystery. It's a production mystery. And it's this. Why did Ben Bacalé walk away? Bacalé created the show. He shepherded it through 6 seasons. He built a world from nothing, populated it with some of the most original characters in animation history, and guided it from a simple comedy to one of the most philosophically ambitious animated series ever made. And then, at the end of season 6, he stepped back. He left the show in other hands. He moved on. The revival, the wonderfully weird world of Gumball, continues without him at the helm, though his influence is present in the show's DNA. But the original vision, the thing that made Gumball uniquely Gumball, the strange alchemy of comedy and philosophy and visual invention and emotional depth, that was Bacalé's. And his departure is itself a kind of unresolved mystery. Why walk away from a world you built? Why leave these questions unanswered? Why create something so rich and so strange and then hand it to someone else? Maybe the answer is that the questions were never his to answer. Maybe the answer is that a creator's job isn't to complete a world, but to begin it, to set it in motion, to give it enough life and enough mystery to sustain itself after the creator is gone. Maybe Bacalé understood that the best thing he could do for Elmore was to leave it unfinished, to let the mysteries stay mysterious, to trust the audience and future creators to carry the world forward in their own way, filling the gaps with their own imagination, finding their own answers, or choosing to live without them. Maybe that's the real answer to the show's biggest mystery. Maybe the show wasn't asking whether Elmore continues to exist when nobody's watching. Maybe it was telling us that it does, that it has to, because we can't stop thinking about it. And as long as we can't stop thinking about it, it's still real, still running, still out there, somewhere, in the amazing world of our own minds. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it gave you something to carry with you, whether you're heading to sleep or lying awake in the dark, thinking about a blue cat who might or might not know he's in a cartoon. Either way, the questions will be there in the morning. They'll be there whenever you need them. They don't expire. They don't resolve. They just wait, patiently, for you to come back and think about them a little more. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being part of this community. And I'll see you in the next one. Good night.